Fast and easy. All bias is explained. Bias blind spot. It's the tendency to see others as biased while believing you're being completely fair. For example, you say a coworker is bad at giving feedback because they're biased. But when you give harsh feedback, you think you're just being honest. Gambler's fallacy. As the name suggests, the gambler's fallacy is associated with gambling. It's the wrong idea that past results change future chances, even when each try is separate. For example, if a coin lands on heads 5 times, you might think the tail has to come next, but the chances are still the same each time. Omission bias. Omission bias is the tendency to think doing nothing is better than doing something, even if action would help more. For example, an employee witnesses a coworker being harassed, but stays silent, thinking, "At least I didn't cause any drama," even though their silence allows it to continue. Proportionality bias. When a famous celebrity dies in a simple accident, many people assume there must be a bigger reason, like a secret plot or foul play. That's the proportionality bias, the belief that big events must have big causes, even when the real reason is small or random. Moral credential effect. It happens when someone does a good deed and then feels like they've earned the right to do something wrong or unfair afterward. For example, a person who speaks up for equality might later make a biased comment thinking, "It's okay, I've shown I'm not prejudiced." Self-serving bias. Let's say you pass a test. You proudly claim that it's because you're smart, but when you fail, you blame the teacher. This is called self-serving bias. It's about taking credit for your success, but blaming others for your failures. Framing effect. Sometimes how information is presented changes the way you think about it, even if the facts stay the same. For example, if I say 90% fat-free, it would be better than saying 10% fat, even though both mean the same thing. This also includes the contrast effect, where something looks better or worse depending on what it's compared to. Actor-observer bias. It happens when we blame the situation for our own actions, but blame others' actions on their personality. My friend once showed up late and said there was traffic. I believed her. But when I was late the next day, she said, "You never manage your time well." Picture superiority effect. When information is shown as a picture, it sticks more in our minds, making it easier to recall later than plain text. Outcome bias. It happens when we judge a decision based on its result, not the logic behind it. A bad outcome doesn't always mean the decision was wrong at the time. For example, a doctor chooses the best treatment based on medical evidence, but the patient doesn't survive. People say it was a bad decision, even though it was the right call. Mere exposure effect. People tend to like things more simply because they see them often, even if they didn't like them at first. Hard, easy effect. We're often overconfident with hard questions and doubtful with simple ones, leading to poor self-judgment in both cases. Survivorship bias. It's a logical error where we focus only on the successes and ignore the failures. This can lead to misleading conclusions or poor decisions. Baader-Meinhof Phenomenon, also called frequency illusion. This bias happens when you notice something new and then start seeing it everywhere because your brain is now tuned into it. Have you ever learned a new car model and then started seeing it everywhere? It happens to me all the time. Availability heuristic. We tend to estimate how likely something is based on how easily it comes to mind, rather than how often it really happens. For example, plane crashes seem scarier than car accidents because they're more memorable, even though they're far less common. Dunning-Kruger Effect. It's a bias where people with low ability overestimate their skills, while highly skilled people may doubt themselves, because they assume tasks are just as easy for everyone else. Halo Effect. It's a bias where our overall impression of someone, like their looks or charm, influences how we judge their other traits, like intelligence or honesty. For example, if someone is attractive, we might also assume they're smart, even without evidence. If you recall different interactions in your life, you'll better understand what I mean. Pygmalion Effect. It happens when higher expectations lead to better performance. If someone believes in you, you're more likely to do well. Decoy Effect. People tend to change their choice between two options when a third, less attractive decoy option is added to make one of the originals look better. Selection bias. It's a form of bias that happens when the sample we study isn't representative, which leads to misleading conclusions. For example, a principal evaluates teaching quality by only asking top-performing students, ignoring the experiences of average or struggling ones. Anchoring bias. It happens when people rely too heavily on the first piece of information they see when making decisions. For example, if a jacket is first shown as $200 and then marked down to $100, it feels like a great deal, even if $100 is the real value. It's a very strong marketing technique. Have you ever observed it? Confirmation bias. It happens when people look for, remember, or interpret information in a way that confirms what they already believe, while ignoring anything that disagrees. Overconfidence effect. It happens when people think they know more than they do, or are too sure about their answers. Egocentric bias. This bias leads people to rely too heavily on their own perspective, often overlooking the views of others in a group. For example, the false consensus bias makes someone assume that most people share their opinions, while the false uniqueness bias makes them believe their abilities or beliefs are more exceptional than they actually are. Hindsight bias. It's the tendency to believe after something has happened that we knew it all along. For example, after a team loses, you say, "I knew they'd lose," even if you weren't sure before. Information bias. This bias happens when people believe that more information always leads to better decisions, even if the extra information is irrelevant. For example, ordering extra medical tests that don't change the diagnosis just to feel more certain. Projection bias. It happens when we assume others think, feel, or will act the same way we do, both now and in the future. For example, you buy snacks while hungry, thinking you'll want them later too. Apophenia. It's the tendency to see patterns or connections in random or meaningless data. Pareidolia is a type of apophenia that occurs when you see a face in clouds or on the moon. Serial position effect. People tend to remember the first and last items in a list better than the middle ones. Next on our list is related to this effect. Recency bias. It's the tendency to give more importance to recent events while ignoring older ones. For example, you rate a movie based only on its ending, forgetting how boring the beginning was. Authority bias. It happens when people trust or follow someone's opinion just because they're in a position of authority, even if the opinion is wrong. Unit bias. It's the tendency to think a single unit of something is the right amount, no matter the size. The next bias in our list is related to the availability heuristic. Availability cascade. It happens when an idea gains belief simply because it's repeated often, not because it's true. For example, a false rumor spreads online, and people start believing it just because everyone's talking about it. Bandwagon effect. It's the tendency to adopt beliefs or behaviors simply because many other people are doing the same. This often happens for two main reasons: conformism, which is the desire to fit in with the group, and lack of information, where people assume the crowd must be right. Next in line effect. People tend to forget what others say right before or after their turn to speak because they're focused on their own performance. Illusory truth effect. It's the tendency to believe something is true just because we've heard it repeatedly, even if it's false. Ingroup bias. It's the tendency to favor people who belong to our own group, whether they're friends, teammates, or individuals who share our background. The mere exposure effect also plays a significant role in reinforcing this bias. Spotlight effect. It's the tendency to think others notice you more than they actually do. For example, you trip in public and feel embarrassed, but most people didn't even notice. Choice. Supportive bias. It's the tendency to remember your past choices as better than they were, focusing on the positives and ignoring the negatives. My friend bought an overpriced phone and now says, "It's perfect," even though it keeps freezing. Strange. Ostrich effect. It's the tendency to avoid negative information by ignoring it, like burying your head in the sand, hoping the problem goes away. Selective perception bias. It's the tendency to see and interpret information in a way that supports your existing beliefs, while ignoring anything that challenges them. For example, two people watch the same news clip. One sees it as fair, and the other calls it biased. Peak end rule. People tend to judge an experience based on how they felt at its most intense moment and at the end, rather than the whole experience. For example, you remember a long, boring movie as great just because the ending was exciting, If you'd like to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Lots of exciting content is on the way.